If you look around the modern world, almost nothing gets built without cement. Your apartment building, the highway you drive on, the skyscraper downtown, the bridges spanning rivers, they all rely on this dull gray powder. Globally, we consume over 4 billion tons of cement every single year. It is quite literally the glue holding modern civilization together. By every logical measure, owning a cement factory should make you immensely wealthy. Everyone needs it, demand is perpetual, and urbanization across the developing world is skyrocketing. So here's the strange part. Most independent cement plant owners spend their first 5 to 7 years terrified of bankruptcy. It's not because people aren't buying. It's not because the product is unessential. It's because the economics of cement manufacturing are almost perfectly designed to swallow cash, demand brutal capital expenditure, and punish anyone who doesn't control their raw material supply. By the end of this, you'll know exactly how a modern cement plant makes money, why the ones that fail usually do so before they even pour their first bag, and what the actual profit math looks like on a per-ton basis. To understand the economics of cement, you first have to understand what it actually takes to open a plant. This isn't a small workshop you can bootstrap with a few $1,000s and a dream. Building a modern, medium-scale, dry-process cement plant from scratch is an absolute financial monster. You are looking at an upfront investment anywhere between $150 million to $300 million US dollars. The heart of the plant is a massive rotary kiln, a rotating steel cylinder up to 200 meters long that operates at temperatures exceeding 1450 degrees Celsius. Just purchasing and installing this heavy machinery eats up tens of millions of dollars. You cannot build a cement factory just anywhere. You must build it directly on top of, or adjacent to, a massive limestone deposit. Limestone makes up about 80% of the raw mix for cement. Cement production is a continuous chemical process. Beyond limestone, you need clay or shale to provide silica, alumina, and iron oxide. You also need gypsum added at the very end, about 5%, to control how fast the cement sets. If you don't own your own limestone quarry right next to the factory, transport costs will completely obliterate your profit margins before the raw stone even touches the crusher. Capital expenditure is only the beginning of the nightmare for a new owner. Securing environmental permits takes years of legal battles and heavy lobbying. Local communities fiercely resist the establishment of massive industrial quarries in their backyards. Local zoning boards demand extensive environmental impact studies before breaking ground. Once you've spent hundreds of millions building the plant, how do you actually make the product? And more importantly, what does it cost to keep the fires burning? Raw limestone and clay are blasted out of the quarry, hauled by massive dump trucks, and fed into industrial crushers that smash boulders down to pebble size. The crushed rock is ground into a fine powder called raw meal. The raw meal is fed into the giant rotary kiln. Inside, extreme heat drives off carbon dioxide from the limestone, fusing the minerals into marble-sized gray lumps called clinker. Clinker is cooled, mixed with a dash of gypsum, and ground down into ultrafine cement powder. Here is where the business model breaks most operators. Cement manufacturing is brutally energy intensive. To heat a giant rotary kiln to 1450 degrees 24 hours a day, you burn massive amounts of fuel, typically coal, petcoke, or natural gas. Alongside fuel, you need immense amounts of electricity to run the giant grinding mills and heavy ventilation fans. Fuel and power costs alone account for 40 to 60% of total operating expenses in a cement plant. If global energy prices spike due to supply chain disruptions, your production costs double overnight without warning. Unlike a small-scale retail business, you cannot just shut down a cement kiln for a short weekend break. Turning a kiln on and off thermal shocks the refractory brick lining inside. This thermal shock causes millions of dollars in severe structural damage to the steel shell. You have to keep the fire burning continuously, even when local construction demand suddenly drops off a cliff. Raw material testing laboratories operate around the clock to maintain strict chemical consistency in the raw meal mix. If the silica ratio drifts even slightly off target, the entire batch of clinker fails structural strength standards. Entire kiln loads must be dumped or recycled if the burning temperature fluctuates outside of precise engineering tolerances. Maintenance crews work in hazardous conditions, replacing worn-out internal wear plates inside massive multi-story ball-grinding mills daily. Cooling systems require continuous water supply to prevent overheating of critical mechanical bearings, supporting the multi-ton rotating steel kiln. Baghouse filters trap microscopic dust particles, escaping the exhaust stack to comply with government air quality standards and regulations. Failure of these emission filters brings immediate heavy regulatory fines and forced government shutdowns of production lines. Coal storage yards must be managed carefully to prevent spontaneous combustion from wet coal piles sitting under sun. Explosive coal dust hazards require advanced safety suppression systems installed throughout the fuel preparation and injection milling areas. Electrical substation transformers hum constantly, drawing as much power as a small town just to keep motors spinning. How does a cement plant generate revenue? You sell cement by the ton, typically packaged in 50-kilogram bags. Alternatively, you ship in bulk via pneumatic tanker trucks or rail cars directly to major construction sites and contractors. On average, producing 1 ton of cement costs roughly $60 to $80, heavily dependent on local energy. In a stable regional market, a ton of cement sells wholesale for $90 to $120. That leaves a gross operating margin of roughly $20 to $40 per ton of finished product sold. When your plant is pushing out 1 million tons a year, that financial math looks incredible on paper. However, cement is a classic low-value, high-weight commodity product. It is exceptionally heavy, bulky, and structurally sensitive to moisture damage if exposed to rain during transit phases. Because transport costs scale up rapidly by truck, a cement plant has a strict economic delivery radius limit. That profitable delivery radius is generally only about 150 to 200 miles from the plant. Beyond that specific distance, the cost of diesel fuel and freight completely eats up all your profit margins. If your local construction market experiences a sudden economic slowdown, you cannot easily ship your excess cement abroad. Ocean shipping or long-distance rail freight destroys your competitive pricing advantage against local competitors in distant regional markets. You are completely trapped by geography and local construction demand cycles happening within your immediate 200-mile zone. Sales teams must aggressively lock down long-term supply contracts with major real estate developers and highway construction contractors. Without guaranteed forward purchase orders, mountains of unsold bagged cement sit in warehouses absorbing moisture and turning useless. Credit terms offered to construction contractors often stretch up to 90 days, creating severe cash flow crunches. If a major construction firm client goes bankrupt mid-project, your accounts receivable department faces catastrophic unrecoverable bad debt. Silo storage capacity limits how long you can stockpile clinker before halting production lines due to packed bins. Bulk loading spouts require precise weight calibration to prevent truck overloading fines on public highways leaving the factory gates. Seasonal weather changes create massive demand drops during winter months, when freezing temperatures halt outdoor concrete pouring work. Plant operators must build up cash reserves during summer construction booms to survive zero-revenue winter maintenance shutdown periods. Price wars break out quickly when a new rival plant opens inside your exclusive regional delivery territory zone. Competitors undercut wholesale prices below production cost just to maintain market share and bankrupt smaller independent regional producers. Surviving these local price wars requires deep financial backing and access to emergency revolving lines of bank credit. Most independent owners lack this financial cushion and collapse fast. Because building a plant requires hundreds of millions in upfront capital and operating margins depend entirely on volume, small independent cement companies rarely survive over the long term. This structural reality is why the global cement industry is dominated by massive multinational corporate giants like Holcim. Other global conglomerates like Cemex and Heidelberg Materials control vast networks of interconnected international production and distribution facilities. A mega plant producing 3 million tons a year drives down its per-ton energy and labor costs significantly compared. This scale advantage crushes smaller 500,000-ton regional independent plants struggling with higher relative fixed administrative overhead expenses. The biggest corporate players practice aggressive vertical integration strategies across their entire regional and international operational supply footprints. They don't just own the cement manufacturing factory itself. They own the limestone quarries, the freight logistics fleets. They own the distribution terminals and the ready-mix concrete batching plants that consume their manufactured cement output directly. By controlling every single step from rock to building site, they squeeze out independent middlemen at every turn. Modern cement production accounts for roughly 7% of global industrial carbon dioxide emissions, because cooking limestone releases CO2 directly into the atmosphere through calcination chemistry. Regulatory compliance, heavy carbon tax penalties, and green transition costs heavily favor massive corporations with deep capital reserve funds. Transitioning traditional kilns to burn alternative waste fuels requires multi-million-dollar engineering upgrades that bankrupt smaller regional market players. Carbon capture and storage technology investments demand billions in research spending that only global conglomerates can realistically afford. Governments increasingly tighten environmental laws, forcing non-compliant independent plants out of business through unpayable pollution, fines, and sanctions. So, what does owning a cement factory actually buy you in the harsh reality of modern global commerce? If you're a small, independent regional operator, trapped far from cheap energy sources, facing a local housing slump, and burdened by heavy bank debt from construction loans, it buys you a grueling, low-margin financial cash trap. But if you are a massive vertically integrated producer, sitting comfortably on a 50-year limestone quarry reserve deposit, running hyper-efficient modern kilns, and supplying booming urban infrastructure expansion projects, it acts as an absolute cash printer. The cement business doesn't care how hard you work. It doesn't care how good your plant engineering is. It doesn't care how much society desperately needs your product to build the future of human, modern civilization. The industry only cares about your sheer operational scale. It cares about your predictable access to cheap energy. It cares entirely about your geographical proximity to the next major real estate and highway construction market boom. Choose your location wisely, or the gray dust will bury your balance sheet before you ever turn profit.